All right. So for today, I probably saw my email. I went ahead and pushed out the latest version of the advanced model, which is 5.37. There's some pretty significant changes that I want to make sure are understood in that, right? So I figured we'll just spend a few minutes, maybe the first 10, 15 minutes, just walking through those changes so that it's understood, they're clear, answer any questions you may have. And then we'll go ahead and I, we touched a little bit on the other income tab, and I just want to circle back to that one just to make sure it's clear on how that works in the model, and then open it up for questions for you guys. All right, so on the left side of my screen here, sorry, on my right side of the screen, I have all the enhancements that were made. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. So long list of enhancements. A lot of them are just little tiny formatting changes. There's really only one change that would affect the output of the underwriting model, which I'll talk about, and it's a very, very minor impact. Most of the other changes are formatting, additional information, things like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and walk through. I organized my change descriptions by tab, so we could just stick to each tab. First thing I'll mention, I'm going to go and zoom in for you guys, is this whisper price and offer price. I went and added the cap rate, and that cap rate is calculated on your in-place actuals. So after you map the T12, these will populate with whatever the whisper price is versus the actuals below and your offer price. So just, I find that really helpful. I don't know why it took me so long to add that. If we go down unit tab, we have this unit mix summary. So sometimes I'll get asked the question like, well, what is the percentage of one bedroom and two bedrooms? And if you have a big unit mix, it's hard to kind of understand that. So I just put a quick summary down below. And really interesting formula. And just so you know, this is a really cool benefit of ChatGPT, because I just literally said, hey, I have two columns of data, and it varies in length. I need to create a formula to combine them all. And it wrote me the formula. It's incredible. And then simple deal summary. So we'll touch on this a little bit more. There's a button on the top right. It's the deal summary. I've talked about it in a prior training. You just click this. It copies the deal summary to your clipboard, and then you can paste it in an email. So I just paste it right here over the top of everything. So this deal summary is, it's got a interesting. So this deal summary right here is in the DRC tab. That's a new tab that we'll look at in just a second. But essentially what this is intending to do is these are really all the high level and important underwriting metrics that we tend to talk about as a team. So when we do our deal review, what we were doing is looking at the full on summary tab. And I think some people on the team were getting a little lost in that. It's nice. It has a lot of detail. So I created this tighter summary, and it seems to answer most of the questions for the team. And then there's additional things we'll check that are part of the DRC tab. So we'll cover that in a second. One of the big changes that I want to talk about, I think this one's a little unique to this model. So when we have a supplemental, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the supplemental option, right? What happens in the model is the proceeds that come from that supplemental, the priority for those proceeds is to pay down the capital partners, right? So the LP partners, so you're trying to pay that down. That is the absolute priority. And then once that's paid off, what happens then is it goes towards trying to pay any preferred deficiency. So this is very common. I think this is the most common practice for this kind of return waterfall. But there are some models that will actually prioritize the return deficiency before the return of capital. And I've gotten that request a couple of times, like, hey, what if we wanted to true up our deficiency? So if we're running a preferred return deficiency, what if we wanted to pay that first before returning capital, right? So when I click this supplemental, this box becomes activated. So let me just show you that one more time. So if it's off, and this is only in the case of either a supplemental or a refinance, so kind of a mid-cycle capital event. You see there's no box to check here. It doesn't matter. But as soon as I click on the supplemental, this drop down pops up for the cash on cash preferred return. I have a caption here so you can see. Come on. It says you can toggle it to yes or no. And again, yes means the preferred return deficiency gets paid back first before return of capital, or no means 100% of the proceeds goes towards return of capital. And then if there's anything left over, then it goes back towards paying the return deficiency. So it kind of toggles that. And the reason this is important is it will change your returns quite a bit, right? Because instead of paying return of capital, if you toggle this thing to on, it's paying the return deficiency, which means you're returning less capital, which means in forward-looking years after the supplemental, your pref that you're required to pay will actually be more than if you had just allocated all those funds towards paying down the return or the capital account. So let me pause there. Right, any questions on that one? So like I said, most common is not to do that. It is most common to pay back the capital account first before the return deficiency. So you can play with
on what I'm looking at the one that you sent out new, and I added the supplemental, and I obviously I don't have any data captured in the model yet, and so nothing like I'm not seeing catch up yes or no. I am if I click supplemental and then I go into it, I can see that it's there, but nothing populates. It's all grayed out.
Yeah. It's because it's looking at the model to make sure there's data to return, right? So once it's filled out, it'll be available, but
no problem. Yeah. Gotcha. All right. Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's just an optional toggle. Again, the standard for the model is no. That's going to be the default. And that's how the model has been operating up to this point, and it's probably the most common. But I do know, I think some investors in other coaching programs actually prefer return of capital, or no, not return, prefer to pay back that deficiency. And so it's an option now. But again, be careful how you use it. Pay attention to your returns again, because it really matters. Like what's left in that capital account is what the preferred return is being generated from. So if you're prioritizing the return deficiency, that capital account in later years will be much higher, depending on the amount of deficiency, but the capital account will be much higher. Therefore, your return will be quite a bit different.
And Craig, shall this information be shared with the LPs so they will know that there will be a preferred return efficiency instead of the capital?
Yes. Yeah. And you'll see like this is all pretty high level, but when you get into like actually drafting your PPM, the return structure will be incredibly detailed. And that's what your LPs will sign off on. But yeah, this would be important to say. Like, your presentation, you say, well, this is how we're going to split out. We're going to do 8 pref. If we model a refinance, we're going to prioritize that again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, and then the other thing, I changed the label here. It just used to say CapEx reserves. I changed it to lender CapEx reserves. I think there's some confusion between operating reserves and lender CapEx reserve. So operating reserves are the reserves that you hold as a team, as a GP team. It's kind of your rainy day fund. If something goes sideways, you have some cash in the bank to handle it. Lender CapEx reserves are what the lenders often require you to hold in an escrow account, and then you pay into annually or monthly, actually, and then you could draw from it if you have any kind of small repairs or things like that.
I have a question on the operating reserves. Is that it? So if you change that months to like 2 or 3 months, that data gets filled in after you enter your operating information, right?
Yes, exactly. So the only input here is actually in the yellow cell. So you're putting a whole amount and it's calculating here the months of year one expenses covered by that amount. It's just kind of a metrics. Some models I noticed will do dollars per unit, like $1,000 per unit per year is what they'll hold in reserve, stuff like that. So
yeah, but we don't input that, right? We that element.
Yeah, this is a formula right now, but you can overwrite that and it will only populate once you've completed your year one pro forma.
Got it. Yeah.
So that's how this formula is working, but you can always manually overwrite it. Okay. That is it for this one. We'll take a look at the DRC tab. This is brand new. So we're implementing this on our team. Again, we're constantly trying to provide more structure into our deal review process so that it's repeatable and that we check all the boxes. Literally just want to check all the boxes. So this is the process we're implementing on our team. I thought it was pretty useful, so I made it available in the model, broadly speaking. Again, here's the deal summary that we looked at. You could copy it here as well, or from the other tab. We just have some boxes here. So what I'll do before we have our executive deal review is I'll put in the opportunities that I see at the property, highlight whatever risks I feel there are in either at the property or in the underwriting or anything like that, write a brief summary, and then this is key decisions and action items. So after our review, I'll make sure I log all the action items. And so the idea is that when we go through this and we can check all the boxes below that we've reviewed everything, we're all aligned as a team, that's when we lock our underwriting. We're not going to make any more changes unless we get new information and then we review it as a team, because I think it's too easy for people, if you're working on a bigger team, to hop in and try to scenario model or make some changes. And then it's kind of hard to undo those if you don't remember what changes you made. So we've had that happen a couple of times. So, and it's just a checklist. A lot of this gets populated from your underwriting. So I put formulas in here to pull from the underwriting tab, like what are your rent projections, what are your growth projections, what are your expense ratios, things like this. And then it's optional, but you could come in here and put additional notes if there's any commentary that you want to add. Because some of these things are not really data related, they're just contextual. So like operational efficiency. So what we'll do in our meetings now on the deals that we're really serious about, we want to put an LOI in, we'll go through it and we'll literally just check each of these boxes, right? So we'll go through that we've reviewed it all and plot off, put in any notes that are captured for this that we want to remember, and then make a decision whether we put an LOI. But it's helpful, totally optional. This has zero impact on your underwriting model, but it's just kind of a process check. And then if you want, you can uncheck all boxes. All right. Rent roll summary. Real quick, made a few changes. So there was an issue that was happening. If you were to map a rent roll and not map your move-in date or your lease start date or whatever. So let me step back. A lot of these graphs are running off of pivot tables. And Excel gets a little weird with pivot tables. If it has the data once and then it has no data, right? And you refresh those pivot tables, it kind of messes up the groupings and stuff. So that was what was happening. If you don't map, especially the date fields, if you don't map a move-in, a lease start, a lease expiration date, and you refresh this data, the pivot tables would drop the groupings and it would make the graphs look really terrible. So I've fixed the macros. I've forced the groupings after every refresh, so it should be fixed now. And then month to month by unit type and rural summary table. Yeah, we talked about month to month already. It's Paul's recommendation. So we have month to month in mapping now. Again, it's month to month is an optional mapping. The data is not consistent in a lot of rent rolls. Sometimes it'll be a full rent amount, and sometimes it'll be only the additional charge for month to month. I think the additional charge is the most ideal, like what you see here. So you can say, okay, we're getting a lease rent of this. We have 2 leases that are getting an additional $200. Sometimes that's not the case. So just evaluate that on a case by case basis, and you'll decide whether or not how much emphasis you put on that field. I updated some conditional formatting, not a big deal. Oh, and then I provided this copy dashboard button at the top. You could click this, and just like the deal summary, it copies this dashboard to your clipboard. So it copies it. You could dump it into an email, share it with a broker, do whatever you want. So just a way to copy the dashboard. And that's it for this one. Any inputs or questions? All right, pretty straightforward. Let me see what rules. So we added the month-to-month field in here. We talked about that. So that's available to map. See right here, month-to-month. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. That's the main stuff here. T12 tab. There's one issue that happened. It unfortunately happens a bit. There's that chance that you paste in a rent roll or a T12 and you might overlap the cells over here, right? And it just kind of breaks the file, right? If you don't paste this in just right to where it lands, where the total's on the U, then it breaks the file. So what I did is I protected the sheet and I protected these cells, this column in black, so that if you accidentally, so I'll show you, I'll copy this and I'll try and paste it right here, and it's going to try and overlap those fields, but I'm going to get an error. See? So now it says the chart that you're trying to is protected to make a change, unprotect the sheet. So all that's saying is that it's not letting you paste over this black column right here. Everything else is editable, but this will just prevent you from kind of accidentally pasting over this stuff over on the right, breaking the file. That's pretty much it. Tax tab. I noticed that when I was doing my tax analysis that it was a little bit difficult to model like increases in future years. So what I did is I added this annual valuation growth so that I could say, hey, we know we're going to get reassessed in year 3. And I'm expecting, based on my underwriting, that the valuation will increase by 15%. I can model that in there. And now I have a higher basis, tax basis for year 3 when we get reassessed. So it's just a little bit more accurate. Before I was kind of doing that math in this column here. So now you can just estimate your growth rates at those assessment intervals. Payroll calculation, real quick. I changed this. These down here were averages. I was doing averages and I thought that didn't make any sense to do an average for the salary. So I thought a total was more appropriate. So I changed that to a total. That's pretty much the only change there. Repair detail. Very minor change here. I made a change to the Picklist so that same thing with the rent roll mapping, so that as you map a unit type that you're renovating in your underwriting model, that unit type is no longer available in the Picklist after you map it. So you can see 11650 is no longer available because it's already mapped. So this prevents you from accidentally selecting the same unit type more than once. And then the other thing is at the bottom, the other income. So it dawned on me that I do this work. I got my interior renovation. I do this work I do for exterior renovation, but that's not truly my entire CapEx budget because I could have CapEx dollars allocated towards other income value add, which we'll look at in a little bit. I can also have my contingency. So if I wanted to get my entire CapEx budget, there's no easy place to do that. So I just added those fields at the bottom. So you have your other income value add at the bottom. This comes from the other income worksheet. You have your contingency, and you could change your contingency here and then actually transfer repair values. And when you do it, it'll transfer the contingency amount. It'll overwrite what's in the underwriting model. Same as the cost per unit and the exterior costs. So this is your entire snapshot of your CapEx budget right here. Go ahead. So yeah, I think.
Yeah, correct. The contingency you put is 15, 10%, though it depends on the deal, on the uncertainty of the CapEx of the renovation.
Yes, exactly. And I think, so what I don't do in my models, I'm not really accounting for any inflation in my repair budget. So that's also the intent of the contingency. It's just, hey, if costs go up over the, especially if you have a longer timeline, like a 3-year timeline for your renovation, costs are probably likely to go up. So this will help cover those costs and then any other unforeseen things that pop up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Final thing. 2 more things here. So rent comps, no big changes here. The only thing I changed was the scatter plot. The scatter plot was getting really busy because I like to do as many rent comps as I can to just get kind of a better average. And it was showing you this label. It was showing you the 1-1, 600 square feet, 981. And then if you put in the distance, 2.1 miles. It was a really long label. So I changed that. I'm just showing the apartment name and then an R if you designate it as renovated in the table. So it's just cleaned up that graph quite a bit. And then let's see, rent comp. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And you can export that, right?
Yeah, so this was just a little bit, because, depending on the graph, what I do is I just copy, right? And then I will paste image, either an email or, so now here's an image of the graph. So it just depends on what graph you want to share. But I usually just pick and choose like that because I thought about making that copy for all the graphs, but it really depends on how many 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom you're doing, how many rent comps you have. So this is the way I share it now. It's like I'll just copy the 1 bedroom graph, I'll go over to the 2 bedroom, I'll copy that, paste the image into my email. So no automated button for the copy on this one, but if you have a clever idea how to figure out which one's the copy, I'm open to it. Last but not least, so there is a change. So this is the only change that affects your underwriting, that potentially affects your underwriting, and it's not a major impact. So what was happening is if you renovated units and you renovated less than 100% of the units, it was still using the blended rent post-renovation for the GPR analysis on your renovation. So for example, if I did 33 was the biggest delta, the biggest gap if you only did half. So if you notice, my renovated rent is $1,272 for these 33 units that we're going to rent. My blended rent, the 33 classic units and the 33 renovated units, is $1,160. It was using this $1,160 for the GPR and your renovated rent. It's now using the $1,272. So what this means is if you do a partial renovation in this model, your return will be a little bit higher than if you compare it to a partial renovation of the previous model. And I did a lot of testing on this, and the biggest gap that I saw was about, I think it was 2 or 3 tenths of an IRR difference on a really large renovation. So now it's appropriately using the renovated rent for those renovated units instead of the blended rent. Now, if you did 100% renovation, you'll notice the renovated rent is equal to the blended rent because you're renovating all those units. So definitely download the newest model. It will improve your returns on a partial renovation by a little bit. If you're only renovated, so again, the biggest gap occurred at 50% renovated units. If you start renovating more, the gap got much, much smaller. If you renovate less, the gap was smaller. Okay, those are all the changes that were made to the model for this release. I'll pause here for any questions, and then we'll talk about other income. Okay, cool.
Sure.
Yep.
I have a question off topic. I know that you and I discussed this before. If a deal brings in a less than your preferred return cash on cash, and you're giving like 8%, let's just say that cash on cash is 5% for the deal and then 8% on their pref. Is it still calculating the true cash on cash for the deal at the top of the header?
Yep.
Got it.
Exactly. Yeah. So let me turn off the supplement. Yeah. So it's really important this is a really good point because I think it can be confusing on what's actually being displayed. So this metric right here, this is measuring the actual cash on cash of the deal, right? So it doesn't really change between the LP or the project, but this is the cash on cash. So this is the cash being generated by the deal. It's not showing you the waterfall, right? So there's this preferred return, right? We're gonna hit an 8% preferred return to our investors, no matter what. Because if we can't do it with the cash on cash generated by the property, we'll make it up when we sell the property and we'll pay back that deficiency. So for that reason, this will not always equal your preferred return. It could exceed your preferred return if your property is generating more cash flow than the preferred return. But in cases like this, you'll see you're showing a 7.4, but your preferred return is 8. And that's saying what that tells me is this project is operating a preferred return efficiency. So if we don't achieve it, this is the actual cash flow of the property. And you can see for the 5 years of this hold, it's averaging 7.4. We never hit our preferred return through straight cash flow alone. So very likely a deficiency. You can see it down in the return section. And that means that we're going to make that up when we sell it. So yeah, this is very much an operational indicator. It shows you how the property's cash flow is doing relative to the investment made.
Got it. Does the deal summary show the deficiency that's made up on the overall deal summary?
Not on the deal. It doesn't show the actual deficiency. No, doesn't show that. The only place you see that is down in the return. Stop. So right here, this is the return efficiency at this project.
Got it.
But then you see during the capital event right here, we're going to make up that 318,000 first, and then we do the capital, the split. So the order of operation on a capital event is really, it's pay back the capital account, which shows up in the cash flow part, right? So we're paying back the capital account, and then we're making up that deficiency, and then we split whatever's left. So that's actually up here. So the capital account is $11 million. So we made that up. We paid it first, and then we paid the deficiency, and then we split the rest. So return of capital is always priority in a sale. That makes sense?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of returns, I got this question yesterday. It was a really good question. Somebody was in the model, and then so watch AAR right here. We're at 20.3. They modeled a supplemental or second, or a refinance. I'm not sure, but they said, hey, when we had a capital event, our AAR actually went down. Cash on cash goes up. Why does AAR go down? Right, and now it's less than the IRR. So I'll start by saying that there are other models that I've seen. As soon as you model a refinance, it sets the AAR equal to the IRR. And I don't necessarily agree with that because it's not true. It's not accurate. Your AAR is not equal to your IRR because they're very different calculations. But what this is doing, so what happens during a supplemental is you're repaying back the capital account, right? So you're paying back your investors' money, which means your debt service is going to be much higher. There's going to be less cash flow to distribute after the refinance, right? And the AAR is looking at all the cash flows throughout the life of that project against the initial investment, right? So it's true, your AAR will be lower with a refinance because there's less return being paid after the refinance. And it's the same thing with the equity multiple, right? So if you look at the equity multiple, it's 1.85. But if we take off the supplemental, come on. Okay. All right. we take off the supplemental, the equity multiples too, right? So it's important to understand that when you have a mid-cycle capital event, it will drop certain return metrics and it'll boost other return metrics. And I think for that reason, you'll see like when people present deals, they'll focus on certain return metrics. But it makes sense. If I'm an investor, let's say I'm going to turn back on the supplemental. If I'm an investor and I give you $100,000 for a deal, ultimately I want to understand like what is the return on the money I just gave you, right? Well, here it is. It's 17.1 because we're paying back a good portion of your $100,000 mid-cycle, and that's going to reduce your overall return because you're not going to get paid much return after that refinance. That's the same reason that cash on cash goes up because there's less capital left in the deal, and now you're paying returns on that capital, and it looks a lot better, right? And so the equity multiple, this is why I personally like equity multiple. It's very simple, right? It's just like, what do you have in the deal versus what do you get out? And it includes return of capital, right? So a 1.85 is saying a 185% return. So I get all my capital back plus 85%. Right? So I like the equity multiple. It's really simple. If I see a 2, that means I double my money over whatever hold period there is. AAR is just showing that on a annual basis, really. But it does not include return of capital. So I think that's could be confusing. So that for that reason, I think that's the reason we look at several different return metrics so that you can really see how the property is performing. But yeah, anytime I see AAR lower than IRR, that means there's probably a capital event mid-cycle. Because usually if you have one loan and you hold it for the duration and you don't do any capital event, AAR should always be higher, like this. So I'm going to publish something in my Facebook group on this. I think it's important to understand the returns. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Great. Let's go ahead and get into other income real quick. I think this will be pretty quick. I know we took a look at other income, and again, I just want to revisit to make sure we're clear on this. I'm going to close this guy down.
I don't know who asked that question, but I really appreciate that was very educational for me as it relates for the AR versus IR, and then just looking at the multiplier.
Yeah, it is. So they were using a different underwriting model, so they're kind of trying to compare and understand. And it was a really good question because I think the other model they're using was definitely setting it equal to IRR after a refinance, which I don't think is the right thing to do. I think it could be a little misleading. But yeah, it's important. I think so. Paul, I have a PowerPoint slide that I made. I'm going to tweak it and I'll put it in the Facebook group. But it kind of explains like how each metric is used, and then what I want to show you is like I want to build like more of a matrix to show you. Okay, this one's considering your return on capital. Like the equity multiple does not consider the timeline at all. It's a really basic. So that's why we kind of look at 3 or 4 metrics to try and understand the deal. And you'll see in some investor presentations, I think certain metrics are intentionally left out, right? They'll focus really big on AAR, but not IRR, or they'll focus really a lot more on IRR. They'll leave AAR out of it because they're doing refinance, things like that, right?
Yeah, those little red flags to catch. That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So as an investor, always ask for the full view. All right. So this other income value add, I can't overemphasize this enough. I think this is a really important exercise when evaluating a deal. It does take some time. So what I'll do is I'll go through the T12 and I'll literally go through the other income like line by line. I'll try to understand where some of the risk is, right? Like the tenant demographic, for example. If you see a lot of like NSF fees or, damage charges, or if you see like really high numbers for those maybe your tenant profile is not so good, right? And if your plan is to improve the property, then you probably can't rely on that other income going forward, right? You don't want to really make that into your analysis. On the flip side, there are a lot of opportunities to increase the revenue of the property through other income. I mean, like tons of ideas. And it's very much asset specific. So depends on what they're already doing and what kind of class of asset, right? Like a class A asset probably has more ability to absorb like other income programs than maybe a class C, right? For example. So just understanding your property, understanding your other income in the T12 to see what opportunities there may be. And then this worksheet is one that I built to help me model that other income, because I think it's overly simplistic to say, well, we're going to do washer and dryer income, and I'm going to do 50 washer and dryers at, $50 a month, right? And then just plug that into other income, because there are other variables, right? Like how long is it going to take you to implement that? What is the CapEx cost that you're going to incur at that? Are there any ongoing operating costs, right? So one of the things I've seen used a few times is like community Wi-Fi. Seems to be pretty popular, especially like class B and above. So what this is you contract with a telecom provider and they provide community Wi-Fi for your entire complex that everybody uses, and they all have their unique log on. And then you get some revenue for it, and you have an ongoing operating cost associated with that because you got to pay for the Wi-Fi. So you really get that spread. So I wanted to make sure that I can account for all that and capture all that. So this is my attempt to do that. So for example, the first line item that I have here is covered parking. And this is really trying to, and this is all made up, by the way, just so you know. But covered parking is really trying to account for can we go in and install covered parking units? So the way I know this is that I will look at the comp in the area. If the comp has a lot of covered parking, you could go into the websites. What are they charging for the covered parking? And try to determine if it makes sense for you to try and implement that, right? So covered parking in this example, I said, we're going to do 40 units. We're going to start the installation of those in month 4 after we take over the property, because, it takes us a while to get everything lined up. In this example, I was like, we're going to complete it in month 21, for example. And it takes us about 2 months to get them fully in the ground, ready to go, allow people to start parking. And then we're going to have to lease out the covered parking. So I figured maybe we'll start collecting income on that in month 6. So 2 months to do that process, month 6. And then the CapEx per unit of covered parking, I estimated $2,400. We're going to charge $40 a month, and then it's going to have no operating costs associated with that. So what I do with that information, just like I roll the units in the rent roll when you're doing a renovation, it's going to roll these based on your timeline that you set here. And if you want to audit, you can do that below in the other income trended detail. But what it does is it rolls all those. And I only have a 3-year window right now, but it rolls all those, and then it aggregates. So I could say my total CapEx, $96,000 for that effort. That's about a 20% ROI, and it's going to roll on to my income like you see here, right? Year 1's pretty low because we're not collecting income until month 6, and we're not doing a whole lot of units per month. So it's really $3,700, and then it ramps until it's stabilized. I have a gross income component. So if there were ongoing operating costs, let's say like $15 a month, you'll see my net income is different than my gross income, and I have an operating expense. And then CapEx. So you can see the CapEx layout for that. And the cool thing is, once I've done this analysis, I could go through and kind of dream up. I've been seeing this a lot lately, or amenity fees. People are starting to do amenity fees. So it's kind of I think it's a way to just charge people money for living there. So some group or complexes or apartments that I've looked at charge $20, $30 a month for an amenity fee. Charge it to across the whole community. So if that's something you want to implement, you can model that here and then decide if you want to roll it into your thing. So that would be one of those things where it probably would not have a CapEx per unit dollar amount, so like a zero, like valet trash here. You have a monthly income, and there's probably no monthly operating costs to administer that. So you can do this analysis, and what it will do is it aggregates everything up for you. So you can see in year one, we're increasing the other income by $40 per unit per month. And based on my underwriting, it knows that the cap rate's at 5.15 in year one. And that additional value that we've added to the property is $1.4 million based on our other income strategy. So that's quite a bit. So that's why I want to emphasize the other income, is it's significant. Like, it doesn't take many dollars to really impact the valuation of the property. The income is nice, but in the grand scheme of things, the income it really impacts the valuation most. And so I'll pause here, and then I'll pull it into the underwriting model, and then I'll make a few comments, and we'll wrap on that. Any questions on this? Okay. So then, as with everything in this model, none of these tabs over on the right are mandatory or required for the underwriting. So I try my best to make everything optional, and then you could decide whether or not you want to include it in your underwriting model for other income. That is done in the income section. So you'll see right here, I have other income value add. Oh, so I already have this on. I should turn it off. Okay, so there's a toggle. Let me just zoom in a little bit more for you. So other income value add. Right now it's turned off. There's no other income being modeled in this deal. And you see my returns, and then I can come in here. I turn it on, and it pulls all the other income from that tab for years 1 through 3. And then years 4 and beyond, it just applies the other income growth rate from below. And so go ahead and turn that on, pulling this in. And so this is the part I was talking about earlier as well. I don't think it's enough just to capture other income, right? So if I scroll down, I have an other income operating expenses. So any of those ongoing operating expenses that you put in the table, it will capture here for the first 3 years, and then it will escalate those using the expense growth rate below. And then I mentioned the CapEx. So at the very top, there's an other income value add CapEx amount. So whatever you plan to spend to implement those other income items will be captured in your CapEx, and your total renovation cost will include that. So there's 3 areas that it pulls the other income data into. So one thing I'll mention is that I've talked to a few property managers, and it's kind of region specific, but I'm trying to get a good sense for like what percentage of other income is considered normal and what's considered low and high. And so again, super asset specific, region specific, but generally speaking, if you exclude the RUBS billing, other income should be around 10%, plus or minus, right? So if you're so you can see right here, adding those things, I'm at 11.6. And so that's probably getting a little bit into the higher threshold where it may not be supportable. Very asset specific. Can your tenant profile support the additional income that you're requesting? Right. But so that I always try to look at this percentage, because if it's honestly, if you see an asset and it's really high, like 15-16% for other income, take a really hard look at that. Make sure you think it's supported, or you can support that, because that's pretty high. Again, excluding.
What would you say is typical for RUBS? Is it 5%?
It's percentage of billing. Yeah, so it's very regional. So I know I look at a lot of properties in Atlanta. Atlanta has some of the highest water sewer charges in the country. So their utilities tend to be very high in Atlanta. And so this RUBS tends to also be very high because they're billing back the utility. So I tend to look at RUBS more so on a bill back. So I'll look at the utilities. And then honestly, so I'll look at utility. So utility right here, we're at $800 a unit. And then it has this percentage. So I'm at 80% at this amount. But also I will caution, RUBS and utilities are very different on many railroads. Many T12s. So pay particular attention to your T12. Like this one only has one. Oh, this is terrible. This has one RUBS, right? This is really hard. I don't know what's included in there. Sometimes RUBS, well, I mean, most often it'll be broken out between 4 or 5 different line items in the other income. And it's usually like water, sewer. Sometimes they include pest. Sometimes they have an electric RUBS. Sometimes they'll include trash. And sometimes they don't include trash. So water and sewer is like the only guarantee. Usually that one lines up perfectly. But sometimes you'll see trash. That's just other income. It's not included in the RUBS bill back. Or sometimes you'll see a trash RUBS, but if you go down to the utility section, it won't be included in here. Right? So this one does not have trash in the utility because trash can also be seen as a contract service. So I will actually look at this level of detail. Where's my contract services? This is a very old T12, so here we go. Oh, it just has snow, so I don't know where trash is in this. But those are the things. So what I'll do when I do my RUBS analysis, because I will look line item by line item. I'll match it up. I'll match the RUBS item versus the expense item and see what that ratio is. So I'll look at trash, I'll look at pest control, I'll look at water sewer, I'll look at electric if there's a RUBS electric individually, if you want to get really accurate. And I've thought about, because that gets to be tedious, I thought about trying to break out the utility in the utility RUBS. But then it's going to be that many more things that you're going to have to map every single time. So I'm on the fence. But does that answer your question, Praveen?
It does, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, but most often than not, I look at RUBS as a percent of the utility, which is 80% in this case.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we got a few minutes for questions. That's all I had to share. What other questions do you guys have? Okay, going once. Quick comment on the calendar training sessions. So it's to put the calendar links in the emails that I send. So what I'm going to do is, why is this not working? Oh, it's been a while since I rebooted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a calendar out. So here we go. So I put a calendar on my website. I'll send an email with a link to the calendar for training and all that. But I think it'll be easier from time wise to publish a calendar like this. And then you could come through and you can see the training dates and then add the ones that you want to your calendar this way. So I'll be doing this going forward. I have not scheduled any training for December yet. I'm going to be traveling a bit. So look for those shortly, probably this weekend. I'll get those scheduled.
Yeah, this is really helpful.
Yeah, I think this will be good. Be easier for me at least. Okay. I think that's all I wanted to cover. If there are no questions, we'll give you a little bit of time back and hope you guys have a great holiday.